In the cold fog of a quiet Seattle pier, a reclusive 45-year-old dock worker named Elias Walker expected another silent morning until his German Shepherd Max suddenly froze. Then barked, then lunged at a sealed cargo crate as if something inside was begging for life. Workers stepped back. The crate didn't move, yet Max refused to let go, claws ripping at the wood, eyes wild with desperation Elias had never seen before. And when authorities finally cracked the lid open, what they discovered inside didn't just shock the pier. It dragged Elias back into a past he spent years trying to forget, and into a nightmare far from over. If this story touches you, please help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Your click really means more than you think. God bless you for keeping hope alive. Morning fog curled over the Seattle pier, like a quiet ghost breathing across the water, swallowing the edges of cranes, ropes, and steel containers in a muted gray haze. Elias Walker stood alone near the loading platform, shoulders hunched beneath his heavy dark brown leather coat. At 45, he carried the look of a man scraped down by time, 6 feet tall, lean but wiry from years of hard labor, a face cut with sharp angles, and a jaw hiding uneven stubble. His dark brown hair, longer than most dock workers wore theirs, brushed his collar and streaked with silver at the temples. His gray eyes, deep, restless, and shadowed by mistakes he never spoke of, rarely rose to meet anyone else's. In a place filled with noise, Elias lived like a ghost, drifting between shifts, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Max was the exception. The 4-year-old German Shepherd trotted at Elias's side, fur thick and sable posture, confident like a retired soldier who had once known command and purpose. Max had piercing amber eyes and a faint scar across his left flank, the only physical reminder of the dangerous life he lived before Elias adopted him from a rescue auction. The dog, disciplined and quietly loyal, mirrored the man beside him in ways neither fully understood. On most mornings, Max moved with an alert calm, watching forklifts roll by or greeting crewmen with a slow wag of his tail. But today, something in the air felt off. Max's ears twitched. His steps stiffened. Elias noticed immediately because Max never stiffened without reason. "Easy, boy," Elias murmured in a low voice, still gravelly from sleep. But Max did not ease. Instead, his head snapped toward a shipping vessel being unloaded at the far end of the pier. Workers moved crates off the deck under the fading yellow lights, their boots clanking against metal ramps. The fog parted just enough for Elias to see a blue cargo crate, medium-sized, sitting alone near the railings. No barcode sticker, no manifest tag, no dock ID, just a crate, anonymous, silent, and wrong. Max froze, body taut from neck to tail. Then came the growl. Deep, low, primal. The kind of sound Max only made when he sensed something alive and suffering. Elias's heart tightened before his mind even processed the situation. Max surged forward, yanking the leash so hard that Elias stumbled a step. Several workers paused mid-task to stare. Max barked a sharp, desperate sound that cut through the fog like a flare. Elias tightened his grip. "Max, what is it?" But Max wasn't listening. He lunged again, claws scraping against the wooden pier as he dragged Elias toward the crate. By the time they reached it, Max was shaking, truly shaking, and Elias felt cold fingers crawl down his spine. This wasn't aggression. It wasn't alert training. This was fear and urgency. Elias pressed a palm against Max's shoulder, trying to steady him. The dog shoved forward anyway, shoving his nose into the seam where the crate corners met. He whined a sharp, heart-piercing sound Elias had never heard from him. Not once. Not even the day Elias first brought him home, trembling after the trauma of losing his previous handler. One of the dock workers, a broad-shouldered man named Kenny, with a worn baseball cap and an accent thicker than rope, walked over with a chuckle. "What's got into your dog?" "Walker smells something tasty in there," Max snarled at the crate, not at Kenny. Another worker laughed. "Probably some idiot paid for express shipping on a frozen turkey." Elias didn't smile. He stepped closer and laid his hand on the crate. The wood was cold from the morning air, damp from fog, but beneath the surface, almost imperceptible, something shifted. A faint tremor. A thump. His breath caught. He pressed harder. Another tremor fluttered under his palm. Not mechanical, not cargo shifting, something alive. A distant, painful memory thundered through his chest. Shouts of collapsing structure, a small hand slipping from his grasp, a past he'd buried so deep he pretended it never happened. His jaw clenched. "Get the supervisor," Elias said quietly. Kenny blinked. "You serious? Get him." Within a minute, Lloyd Harrison, the pier supervisor, arrived. A stout man in his 50s with a brisk walk and a vest full of keys. Lloyd usually carried an impatient scowl. Today was no different. "What's the problem?" Elias pointed to the crate. "It moved." "Cargo shifts," Lloyd said dismissively. "Not like this," Elias replied. "Max thinks something's wrong." As if on cue, Max let out a piercing bark and slammed his paws against the crate claws, gouging thin lines in the wood. Lloyd's expression changed. "Slightly." "Enough." "Is it making noise, not noise?" Elias murmured. His throat felt tight. Something's tapping, like a heartbeat. Lloyd cursed under his breath and signaled 2 workers. "Pop the top." "Now." If this is some illegal transport stunt again, I swear Elias didn't hear the rest. His mind had narrowed into a tunnel. His pulse hammered as he watched the men slide a pry bar under the metal latch. Fog thickened around them, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Max backed up a step, trembling violently. Elias crouched beside him, running a steadying hand over the dog's shoulders, though his own fingers shook. "It's okay, boy. We'll see what's in there," he whispered. But he wasn't sure he believed it. With a metallic snap, the latch broke free. The men gripped the lid. Max exploded forward, barking with frantic terror, almost slipping from Elias's grasp. The lid began to lift, slowly, creaking, revealing darkness inside. Max's barking turned wild, urgent, echoing across the pier. Elias felt his heart stop. Not again. Please, not again. And as the fog curled tighter around them and the crate lid rose another inch, Elias Walker's eyes darkened with a grief he thought he'd buried forever, because whatever waited inside that crate he already knew, it was something he could not ignore. Something that would drag him straight back into the very past he had spent years trying to escape. Max barked one final desperate warning, and the chapter ended in a chilling silence, broken only by the thundering beat of Elias's heart. The fog thinned slightly as the lid of the blue crate creaked open, a pale stripe of morning light sliding across its shadowed interior. The cold air around Elias Walker felt suddenly sharper, almost metallic, as if the world itself inhaled in fear. Elias leaned forward, gray eyes narrowing. Max stood rigid at his side, every muscle pulled tight, amber eyes locked on the darkness. When the workers lifted the lid fully, a soft gasp rippled through the pier. Inside the crate was not contraband, not weapons, not drugs, not machinery. It was a little girl. No more than 3 years old, her tiny body curled into itself, like someone had folded her into the world wrong. She was wrapped in a thin pink blanket, soaked with cold moisture from the fog. Her skin had turned a bluish-pale, lips trembling without sound, lashes stuck together as if frozen. A shockwave hit Elias so hard he felt his knees threaten to give. His breath caught memories slamming into him with violent clarity. A ruined building, smoke, a child's cry, fading into rubble. His hands digging and digging until they bled, until he knew he was too late. "No," he whispered, barely audible. His voice cracked like something breaking inside him. Not again. The workers stumbled back in horror. One of them, a younger man named Bryce with sandy hair and freckles, stammered, Who puts a kid in there, what the hell?" But Elias wasn't listening. His body moved before thought. He reached into the crate with trembling hands and lifted the girl against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. Warmth barely emanated from her, as if life inside her flickered on the edge of going out. He held her carefully, almost reverently, as though afraid the slightest pressure would shatter her. Max stepped close, letting out a low, heartbroken whine Elias had never heard from him before. The dog pressed his nose gently to the girl's small hand, his breath warm against her icy skin. Elias tightened his hold, feeling the girl's faint shivers against his flannel shirt and the rough leather of his coat. His throat swelled. "It's okay," he murmured, though he knew it wasn't. "You're safe now. You're safe." The words were for her, but also for himself, for the part of him still haunted by the one he hadn't saved. Lloyd Harrison, the pier supervisor, jolted into action, grabbing his radio. The usually stern man looked shaken, his brown eyes wide beneath his salt and pepper brows. "Emergency medical team to Pier 12. Child found alive, repeat, child found alive." Chaos erupted instantly. Workers scattered, some running to flag paramedics, others clearing space. Metal boots clanged, radios crackled, voices rose and fell in frantic waves. But in the center of it all, Elias and Max remained still, as if the world had narrowed to only them and the small, fragile life in his arms. As he adjusted the blanket around her, Elias noticed faint purple marks around her wrists, thin, grim grooves that hinted at rope or zip ties. His jaw clenched, and a cold fury burned underneath the fear. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, eyes darkening. When he shifted the blanket, something fluttered free, a piece of paper, small, wrinkled, shoved deep into the fold. Elias caught it with one hand. The handwriting was shaky and uneven. "If anyone finds her, please don't return her to that person." His pulse spiked. Lloyd leaned over his shoulder. "What does it say?" Elias handed it to him silently. Lloyd swore under his breath. Someone knew this was wrong. Someone wanted her found. Or someone wanted her hidden long enough to leave town, Elias said quietly. Before more could be said, sirens wailed from the pier entrance. 2 paramedics rushed toward them. The first, a woman in her early 30s named Tessa Nguyen, small but sharp-eyed, her black hair tied into a tight bun, stepped forward with practiced calm. She had a gentle face framed by soft features, but her movements were quick, precise, revealing years of experience in trauma cases. The second paramedic, a tall man named Ron Barlow, with a shaved head and broad shoulders, carried a medical pack and spoke in a steady baritone. "We'll take her from here." Elias hesitated just for a second before handing the child over. The moment her small weight left his arms, a cold emptiness washed through him, a familiar echo of loss. Tessa examined the girl swiftly. "Hypothermic. Severe. Pulse weak." Ron nodded. "Let's move." As they prepared the stretcher, Max tensed, following every movement, snarling softly when they lifted the girl. Elias touched his back. "Easy. They're helping her." Max quieted, but his amber eyes stayed locked on the stretcher filled with protective instinct. While the paramedics worked, Lloyd called security to pull camera footage, check the entry points, any angles covering the dock since last night. The security office responded quickly, sending a guard jogging toward the pier with a tablet. He reached them, a thin man named Robert Keene, mid-40s, with glasses that kept sliding down the bridge of his nose. "Got the footage you asked for," he said, slightly out of breath. He opened the tablet and replayed the time-stamped recording. The camera showed the fog-thickened pier hours earlier. Shapes moved like ghosts' workers' equipment shadows. Then a figure entered the frame. A woman. She wore a large gray hooded jacket, pulled low posture stiff and hurried. Even through grainy footage, her movements looked familiar, careful, deliberate, the kind belonging to someone used to handling children or medical tasks. She rolled the blue crate toward the loading area, glancing around nervously. Then, without hesitation, she left it. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She simply faded into the fog. "Pause it," Elias said sharply. Robert tapped the screen. Elias squinted at the silhouette. Something about the woman's gait, steady but jittery, tugged at his memory. A teacher. A nurse. Someone whose life revolved around caretaking. Yet something broken inside her had twisted that instinct into something dangerous. Max stepped closer to the tablet, sniffing the screen, as if scent could seep through pixels. Then the dog growled a deep warning growl that vibrated through Elias's boots. Elias exhaled slowly. "You smell her, don't you?" Max's ears pinned forward, body rigid in pure, focused drive. Elias's voice dropped. "You want to find her, boy?" Max answered with a single sharp bark that sliced through the noise of the pier. Elias nodded once, jaw set, heart pounding. "Then we start now." Behind them, the paramedics lifted the stretcher into the ambulance. Tessa looked back and called out, "We'll update you as soon as she stabilizes." The doors slammed shut. The siren wailed. The ambulance sped away, leaving only fog-salt air, and a beginning one Elias hadn't asked for but could no longer walk away from. And as Max stood by his side, hackles raised the investigation into the mysterious woman, and the abandoned child truly began. Cold mist rolled over the Seattle pier, like drifting sheets of battered silk brushing against the brick warehouses, and slipping into every crack between the metal rails. The air tasted of salt and rust, and Elias Walker felt it settle heavily in his lungs as he stood at the edge of Pier 12, one hand gripping Max's leash, the other stuffed deep inside his worn leather coat. His mind churned with the image of the little girl's motionless body wrapped in the soaked pink blanket. He could still feel her weight in his arms, small, fragile, terrifyingly light. Too much like the past he never allowed himself to revisit. Max whined softly, nudging Elias's leg, pulling him back to the present. The dog's nose twitched rapidly. His amber eyes sharpened with focus tail stiffening like a compass needle caught by a magnetic pull. Robert Keene, the thin security guard with constantly slipping glasses, stood beside them, holding the tablet with footage still paused on the hooded woman. His breathing fogged the air as he spoke. "If your dog can track her scent, we might have a shot before she gets too far." Elias didn't answer. He was already watching Max. The German Shepherd lowered his head to the wooden planks, sniffing intently. He locked onto some invisible thread and surged forward. Elias tightened his grip and followed. Kenny and Bryce, the two dock workers from earlier, tagged along reluctantly, though both looked uneasy. The chaos earlier had shaken them more than they wanted to admit. Their boots thudded behind Elias as Max pulled them across the pier. "Where's he taking us?" Bryce asked nervously, his freckles standing out against his pale face. "Wherever the trail leads," Elias replied in a deep, steady tone that left no room for argument. Max led them toward the older part of the docks, where aging brick warehouses stood like forgotten monuments. Their walls stained with moss, and time loomed over the cracked concrete paths. This area used to house crew resting quarters, but most buildings had fallen out of use. Only storage rooms and occasional repair teams still passed through. The fog thickened as they entered the narrow corridors between the warehouses. Max stopped briefly at a metal door, the faded number 7B, hanging crooked above the rusted frame. He sniffed the cracks around it, then pressed his head against the wood, breathing in sharply. Elias stepped forward, pushing gently on the handle. To his surprise, it opened. The moment they walked inside, the stale smell of old blankets, dust and damp walls greeted them. The small room had once been a crew break space. Its peeling blue paint and dented lockers testified to decades of forgotten shifts and weary workers. Now it felt like a secret sanctum someone had crept into during the night. Max circled the space nose pressed low. Elias scanned the room. A broken doll lay beneath a bench, its porcelain head cracked, one painted eye missing. Next to it was a tiny red jacket, the size for a toddler, still holding faint warmth, as if recently handled. On the metal table sat a Polaroid photograph, showing the same little girl they rescued, smiling widely dimples, showing her curls lit by sunlight. The joy in her eyes made the memory of her frozen, trembling body feel even sharper and more cruel. Elias swallowed hard as he lifted the photo. It trembled slightly between his fingers. On the back, written in hurried, slanted handwriting, was the message, "If I can't be a mother, no one deserves to be." The words struck like a blow. Bryce let out a soft gasp. "Man, this isn't a trafficking thing. This is someone messed up in the head." "A delusion," Robert said, pushing his glasses up again. "A fixation. Someone who thinks they're rescuing the kid when they're the danger." Elias felt the old ache flare in his chest. He knew the type. Grief could twist people into shadows. Loss could bend them into something unrecognizable. But the intensity of this person's obsession was different. It felt unstable, desperate, escalating. Max suddenly growled, low and steady, staring at the doorway they had come through. Elias stiffened. "What is it?" Max barked once the sound sharp enough to echo against the empty lockers. Then he bolted out of the room. Max Elias ran after him, boots thumping across concrete. The others followed, breath-ragged, vanishing into the thick fog outside. Max led them through a narrow alley between two crumbling structures. At the end of the alley, the fog opened into the waterfront steel railings, slick boards, and the wide, dark swell of the Puget Sound. The water below churned black and cold, slapping against the rocks. Max skidded to a halt near the edge. Elias reached him seconds later and saw them. Footprints, small child-sized impressions in the thin layer of moisture on the pier's boards. They walked straight toward the water, then simply vanished as if swallowed by the tide. Kenny cursed under his breath. "Please tell me those aren't what I think they are." Elias stared at the prints. His stomach dropped. His pulse hammered in his ears. A terrible image formed in his mind, not just of the child, but of the woman, the one who had placed her in that crate. A woman whose thoughts were clearly unstable, whose grip on reality was slipping. A woman who might corner herself, or worse, choose a terrible way out if pressured. A whisper of dread curled up Elias's spine. "There's someone out there," he murmured, voice low. "Someone desperate enough to do something no one wants to imagine." The wind blew harder, sending mist curling around their legs. The footprints glistened, then faded inches from the edge. Max whined, nudging Elias's hand, as if urging him to understand the danger still unfolding. Elias stared into the dark waves below, a hollow ache forming in his chest. Somewhere out there, a woman was unraveling, and a child still fought for her life in a hospital bed. The hunt wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. A thin drizzle fell over Seattle's harbor district, turning the wooden planks and metal railings slick beneath the muted gray sky. The air was colder than earlier, sharpened by the sting of salt and rain, and Elias Walker felt every drop as he stood outside the temporary command tent erected near Pier 12. The rhythmic tapping of raindrops on canvas mixed with the constant hum of police radios. Inside the tent, an array of screens glowed with grainy footage and citywide camera feeds. Elias wasn't a police officer, not anymore, not since the event that had cracked something inside him, but the officers had come to rely on Max's skill and Elias's presence. Yet as the morning dragged into noon, Elias felt an old unease tightening his chest. The little girl was still in the hospital unconscious, and out here, a predator with the face of a grieving angel was still moving through the city. Max pressed against Elias's leg, sensing the tension curling beneath his ribs. Elias rested a hand on the dog's head, grounding himself with the familiar warmth of Max's fur. Then the tent flap opened, and Detective Laura Moreno strode inside. She was in her early 40s, Latina, with sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, and hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun. Her charcoal suit was damp from the mist, but her posture remained crisp. She carried authority the way others carried breath. "We got a match," she said, without preamble. Her voice steady but edged with something grim cut through the tent. Elias straightened as the officers gathered around her. Laura tapped the screen behind her, bringing up a DMV photo, a woman with long, sandy blonde hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, pale skin, and a worn expression of someone who had cried too many nights alone. The eyes were the most striking feature, large, hollow, yet burning with a strange devotion. "This is Carolyn Hayes," Laura said. 39 years old, former preschool teacher. No criminal record until 4 years ago, when she was reported for emotional mistreatment of several children in her class. Nothing violent, but disturbing patterns. She paused. She lost custody of her own child 1 year later. Severe depressive episodes, delusional tendencies, fixation on signs from God. Her ex-husband filed a restraining order. She disappeared shortly after. Elias stared at the photo. The woman's eyes unsettled him, not because of their emptiness, but because of the misguided tenderness lurking behind them. Max lifted his head and emitted a soft, rumbling growl. Laura continued. Traffic cameras caught her entering the dock area around 2 a.m. Alone. Carrying something that appears to match the size of the crate. She advanced the footage. The figure moved like a ghost beneath the streetlights, each step deliberate, protective, as if rocking a child, not pushing a crate meant to hide one. Elias felt a long-forgotten ache open in his chest. His late wife, Lena, had walked like that in her final months. Hands cradling things that weren't there, eyes searching corners that held only shadows. Depression had consumed her quietly, then swiftly leaving him with more nightmares than memories. He blinked hard, but the images still burned. Max nudged his leg again, pulling him from the brink of memory. Elias inhaled and closed his eyes briefly. "She thinks she's saving the girl," he murmured, "not harming her." Laura nodded. Her file shows a delusion, a belief that certain children are sent by God to replace the ones the world stole from her. She might see the girl as her chosen child, chosen for what one officer muttered. Laura didn't answer. She didn't need to. The air tightened. A young officer named Michael Trent approached a tall man in his late 20s with square shoulders and an earnest face framed by short brown hair. His uniform looked newly pressed, the shine of someone early in his career and still unweathered by the darker corners of humanity. "Detective Moreno, we've got a possible location. Where the houseboat district." He brought up another photo, a row of aging docked houseboats peeling paint and sagging railways. A boat registered under a fake name, but the rental matches Hayes' known pattern. She paid in cash, moved in 2 nights ago. Laura nodded sharply. "Let's move." Minutes later, Elias found himself walking along the worn planks of the houseboat dock, the rain fading into a heavy mist. Max trotted ahead, nose low, ears pricked. The dog slowed when they approached a white and blue houseboat with chipped railings and warped wooden steps. Faint light flickered through a grimy window. Elias felt unease coil around his spine. "She's inside," he whispered. Max's body tensed, confirming it. Laura signaled 2 officers to flank the entrance. Michael Trent stepped forward with his hand on his holster. "Ms. Hayes, this is the Seattle Police Department. We need you to step outside." Silence answered him, thick and eerie, broken only by the slap of water against the hull. Then footsteps. Light, unsteady. The front door creaked open. Carolyn Hayes appeared in the doorway, wearing an oversized beige cardigan over a faded dress. Her blonde hair was tangled strands matted to her cheeks. Her face, though young in structure, bore the exhaustion of someone who had cried too hard for far too long. Her blue eyes were wild, yet glimmering with a fierce, misguided love. When she saw Max, she recoiled, not in fear, but in anguish. "No," she whispered hoarsely. Then louder voice cracking with frenzy. "No, she's mine. I saved her from this broken world. You don't understand. None of you understand." Max stepped forward, body lowered protectively, placing himself between Elias and the woman. His eyes locked onto her with the calm intensity of a trained guardian, an old warrior reading danger, not in violence but in stability. Carolyn clutched the doorway as if it were the only solid thing holding her to the earth. Tears streaked down her pale cheeks. "I loved her," she sobbed. "She was chosen for me. God sent her to replace the child they stole from my arms." Officers moved in carefully. Caroline Laura said gently, "The child is safe now. She needs medical care. You can't help her anymore." Caroline's legs weakened. She shook her head violently, backing up her tears, turning into broken gasps. "They never understood me. They took my baby. They took everything. I won't lose her too." Laura motioned. Officers approached. Carolyn screamed as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Her voice split the mist like a storm breaking open. "They'll never understand the love I gave her." She sagged in their arms, sobbing. "Never." Elias watched, jaw clenched. In her eyes he saw the hollow, aching madness Lena once carried, twisted now into something far darker. Max moved back to Elias's side, leaning lightly into his leg. Elias exhaled slowly, fighting the weight in his chest. Love warped by pain could be more terrifying than hate. And as Caroline was led away through the fog, Elias knew this nightmare wasn't born of evil alone, but of a heart shattered too many times to heal. Soft winter sunlight filtered through the high hospital windows, casting gentle stripes of gold across the pale blue floor. Outside, a stillness hung over Seattle, like the world had paused, holding its breath for the smallest sign of hope. Inside room 214, the quiet beep of a heart monitor was the only sound marking time. Elias Walker stood just inside the doorway, his hands buried in the pockets of his weathered leather coat, feeling oddly out of place among the sterile white walls. Hospitals always unsettled him. They held too many ghosts' voices of people he had failed lives. He hadn't been able to save memories wrapped in the cold scent of antiseptic. Max padded beside him, nails clicking softly on the polished linoleum. The German shepherd's posture was calm, but attentive amber eyes following every subtle movement in the room. He seemed almost reverent, as though he understood the fragile significance of this place. On the hospital bed lay the little girl they had rescued, small, delicate cheeks, still pale from hypothermia. Her hair, a tangle of soft brown curls, framed her face like a fading halo. Machines hummed beside her, monitoring her heartbeat, her oxygen levels, her body's careful battle back into the world. By the bedside sat her mother, a woman in her late 20s, slender with long, dark hair knotted loosely at the nape of her neck. Her eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying, her olive-toned skin marked with exhaustion that came from terror, not lack of sleep. Her name was Rachel Monroe, A single mother who had spent the last 2 days living through a nightmare no parent should ever endure. She clutched her daughter's small hand with both of hers, fingers trembling as though terrified the child might slip away again. When she lifted her head and saw Elias and Max standing there, her breath broke into a sob. "Oh! Oh my God!" she whispered, rising from the chair so quickly it scraped the floor. You're the ones who found her." Elias shifted awkwardly, unused to gratitude. "We were just—" "No," she said softly but firmly, shaking her head. "You saved her." Her voice cracked and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears pooled again in her eyes, but this time they were warm, alive. She stepped toward Elias but paused, as if absorbing the reality of the moment. Her gaze softened. "Thank you," she breathed. "From the bottom of my heart." Elias swallowed hard. He wasn't used to being looked at like that, with relief, with gratitude. For years he had avoided recognition of any kind. People had once thanked him for his service, for his bravery, for his instincts. But after losing Lena, after the darkness swallowed his home and hollowed out his chest, he no longer believed he deserved anyone's praise. Yet here was a young mother looking at him like he had pulled her entire world back from the brink. Before he could respond, a small movement from the bed caught everyone's attention. The child stirred. Rachel gasped. "Lily, baby." Her voice quivered with desperate hope. Elias took an involuntary step forward. Max stood taller, ears pricked. Slowly, painfully slowly, the girl's eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze wandered at first unfocused, drifting across the blurry shapes of machines, ceiling tiles, and shadows. Then her gaze landed on Max. The moment her brown eyes found him, something in her tiny face softened. Her lips parted. A faint breath escaped. Then, with the fragile force of a butterfly's wings, she whispered, "Doggy." Max leaned closer, placing one paw gently against the edge of the mattress. He lowered his head, nudging her arm with the softest touch the big shepherd could muster. Lily let out a tiny, tired giggle. Her hand, still small, still trembling, reached for his fur. The simple contact tugged a sharp, unexpected ache through Elias's chest. It was the sound of a child waking, trusting, reaching out. And for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. It healed. Rachel collapsed into quiet sobs, pressing her forehead to her daughter's shoulder. "She's okay," she cried. "Oh God, she's okay." Elias let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His shoulders relaxed, tension uncoiling like a knot finally coming undone. For a fleeting second he felt Lena's presence not as a ghost of guilt, but as a whisper of peace, as if somewhere beyond the weight of grief she had seen him save this child, and forgiven him for not being able to save her. Rachel wiped her tears and looked at him again. "You gave me my daughter back." Elias shook his head, but this time he didn't look away. Max did most of the work. Lily stroked Max's ear. The dog closed his eyes, leaning into her touch with patience and gentleness, far beyond instinct. Rachel's tears spilled again. "Then thank him, too. Please, tell him he's our hero." Elias smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened the hard lines of his face. "He understands," he murmured. Max's tail thumped gently in response. A nurse entered soon after, a middle-aged man with sandy hair and a kind but firm demeanor named Nurse Coleman. He checked Lily's vitals, adjusted her blanket, and assured Rachel that her daughter was recovering faster than expected. Coleman gave Elias a nod of recognition. He had seen many heroes in his line of work, but few who arrived with loyal companions like Max. When the visit drew to a close, Rachel hugged her daughter and whispered words of comfort. Elias stepped back toward the door, Max matching his pace. He paused once more, giving Lily a final look. The child smiled weakly at him, still holding Max's fur. Something inside Elias, something rusted, forgotten, shifted back into place. Warm. Alive. As he walked out of the hospital, Max trotting close beside him, Elias breathed in the crisp evening air. The city was calmer now, the sky brushed with orange and violet as the sun dipped behind the skyline. When they reached the pier, the familiar fog rolled in across the water, but it no longer carried the heaviness it once did. Elias looked down at Max. The dog gazed up at him with bright, steady eyes, eyes full of trust he had once believed he no longer deserved. "We did good today," Max Elias said quietly. "Better than I thought I still could." Max nudged his leg, a soft huff escaping his muzzle. Elias let out a quiet laugh, almost disbelieving. "Yeah," he whispered, "we really did." And as they walked along the misty pier side by side, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Pure, quiet, unmistakable hope. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or bright angels. They come quietly through a loyal dog, a stranger's courage, or a moment when God touches an ordinary day and turns fear into hope. If this story moved your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still walks among us. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and help us bring more stories of faith and compassion to the world. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide every step you take. Thank you for watching, and may His light be with you always.